Everybody to Intergovernmental Affairs and Justice. I'm Fred Bradshaw, the chair. Substituting for Buckley Belanger, we have David Forbes. We also have here Ken Francis, Hugh Norleen, Eric Lawson, Laura Ross, and Corey Tucker. This evening, the committee will be considering the estimates for Tourism Saskatchewan and the Ministry of Parks, Culture and Sport. We will now begin our consideration of Vote 88, Tourism Saskatchewan, subvote TR01. Minister Bukowski, would you please introduce your officials and make your opening comments?
I'd be happy to, Mr. Chair. To my right is Mary Taylor-Ash, and to my left is Kathy Rintoul and Jonathan Potts. Jonathan is the Executive Director of Marketing Communication, Kathy is the CFO, and Mary is the CEO for Tourism Saskatchewan. I'll have some very brief comments, Mr. Chair. I know the time is very limited, but just give an overview of Tourism Saskatchewan, what we're up to, and then we'll turn it over to questions if there are any. So tourism is one of the world's largest and most rapidly growing sectors. It bolsters the Saskatchewan economy as a major source of employment. In 2017, travel expenditures in the province rose 8.2% to $2.37 billion. More than 13.6 million visits were made to and within the province, for an increase of almost 10% over the previous year. There was good news when Stats Canada confirmed 9.4% growth in domestic visitation in 2017, along with 10.4% growth in travel spending. These numbers rank Saskatchewan in 5th place in the country for domestic tourism growth and well exceeded Canada's growth increase of 2.1%. Nearly 64,000 Saskatchewan residents are employed in full or part-time tourism-related work. 31% are youth between 50 and 24 years old. 13% of tourism employees are Indigenous. Small and medium-sized businesses make up 95% of the tourism sector. Almost 80% of these are situated in communities other than our two major centres. There's a fair amount of research within the tourism sector, and solid tourism research is part of all tourism's decision-making, and the organization works with partners such as Stats Canada, as mentioned, and Destination Canada. Its own research department completed a number of projects during the past fiscal year. These range from testing creative content with consumer markets to industry surveys and focus groups. For example, we learned that operators value the printed and electronic newsletters that tourism distributes. We learned which sections are read the most and what type of information is most helpful. With some simple adjustments, both the newsletters and industry website now provide more facts and advice to help operators. Tourism markets the province's great fishing and hunting assets to our neighbors south of the border. The U.S. represents a lucrative market. These visitors spend more than $100 million each year on traveling here to enjoy these outdoor pursuits. Research has been key to determine who to target, what channels they use most, and how to speak to them. It's encouraging to know that outfitters who are using the research that identifies potential new markets are seeing increases in first-time visitors. 2018 marked year 2 of implementation of a sweeping content strategy for tourism. The strategy outlined a digital-first approach to marketing that highlights Saskatchewan's storytelling and puts fresh, compelling content on the channels most popular with key audiences. Social media is a bigger part, as I mentioned, of our advertising. Being digital-first means being in front of consumers with the information they want and when they want it. The majority of travelers are using social media and online resources to research, plan, and book travel. Last year, tourism's audience on social media channels grew more than 22% to almost 300,000 followers. Saskatchewan has earned a stellar reputation for hosting successful events that position the province in the national and international spotlight and deliver strong economic impact. The benefits of hosting events are wide-reaching. They include broad exposure for Saskatchewan and widespread messaging about its impressive tourism resources and experiences. Local businesses see an increase in activity. Visitors who attend events spend money on accommodations, dining, retail, and entertainment. Since the event hosting program was introduced in 2013, more than $12 million has been invested into a variety of events in communities across Saskatchewan. And some of those major events I'm sure we've all heard about that will be playing host in the next few years. Of course, the 2019 NHL Heritage Classic this fall, the 2020 Grey Cup, and those two are in Regina, of course, and Saskatoon has been awarded the 2020 Junos and the Canadian Curling Trials for 2021 in time for the next Olympics. A robust tourism industry requires a skilled, service-driven workforce. Tourism's Education Division, the Saskatchewan Tourism Education Council, delivered industry training and skill development products to over 16,000 participants last year. This was a substantial increase over the almost 11,000 people trained the year before. STC's national acclaimed Ready to Work program opens doors to employment for people who are underrepresented in the workforce. Ready to Work was delivered in 9 Saskatchewan communities last year and involved 168 participants, the majority of whom are Indigenous. The program has an 80% success rate in graduates obtaining employment or returning to school. There are many reasons to be proud of success and accomplishments in our tourism sector in our province, from maintaining strong economic figures to embracing new technologies and approaches to reach key audiences. Additionally, Saskatchewan brought home 2 major Canadian Tourism Awards last year. Historic Resort Ranch in the southwest part of our province and Tourism Saskatoon were both honored nationally for their work. So that ends my opening comments. I turn over to the chair.
Well, thank you, Minister. I'd like to remind the officials when you speak, could you please state your name so Hansard has your name? Mr. Forbes.
Thank you very much, and I have a few questions, and thanks to the officials for being here. And I do agree Saskatchewan is the best province, it's the most beautiful, and has such a wide-ranging thing. You know, yesterday I was coming into the legislature and there were a couple people sitting on the steps, and this guy, young guy, was coming up he's from Texas, and he wanted to talk to these 2 people about Saskatchewan. And unfortunately, they weren't so keen about Saskatchewan. And I was walking by with my ball cap on and turned around. I didn't look like an MLA. In fact, I got questioned at the front door. But I said, I got to tell you, I overheard what you said, and I got to tell you, Saskatchewan is the best province in Saskatchewan. We all should be proud of that. So that's the good work. And I know Tourism Saskatchewan's doing that good job. But really, everybody's got to believe that. You know, everybody's an ambassador. And the guy from Texas came up. His T-shirt says no messing with Texas, but I thought I'd take a chance. And he came in, and it was a good thing, and we convinced him otherwise. So, and I do have a few questions, and I do want to thank the officials for being here and the good work they're doing. And I am familiar a bit about the Resort Ranch. I think the minister's talked about that, rightly proud. Cypress Hills area is a beautiful part of the province, and it's one of my favorites. So. The $2 million increase, can you elaborate a bit on that? That would be an obvious start.
The increase from previous years, Mr. Forbes, has to do with the event hosting that we had I'd previously talked about in my opening comments. Those are over and above the $800,000 budgeted annually for event hosting, and that is for those major events that will be taking place that I mentioned, but I could certainly go over those in more detail.
You could go over them, and I assume you're talking about the Grey Cup and Junos. Or I don't know if all 4 events the NHL game would fall within the year, in the curling tryouts are also within the account that fiscal year.
They're spread out over. So for the 1920 budget year that's under consideration today, $1.5 million towards the 2020 Grey Cup, $500,000 for the NHL Heritage Classic, and $650 from tourism for the 2020 Juno Awards.
Now, and you had said that actually there was $800K already in the budget, and then there's a 2.3 or something. So you're obviously spending about nearly $3 million on these 4 projects.
Larash. Yeah, we have a event hosting program, And typically, we would spend about $800,000 in that program. Now, that program is accessed through application. So if you're planning an event, and it's got 4 streams, so some of the, if it's a community event, you can apply for money there. Even larger events, marquee events, national events, people apply through that program. So that money gets designated every year because we've had so much success with events. And one of the, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the Tourism Sport Alliance of Canada have named both of our cities, both Regina and Saskatoon, in the top 5 cities under 500,000 to host sporting events. And we are so good at that. It's something that we're very proud of. So we often have requests that exceed our budget, and that's what's happened this year with these rather large events. They just exceed. The $800,000 is gone, and we have to look for additional funds. But they are investments in tourism. So when we look at something like a Grey Cup, that will have a spend of maybe 90 to 95 million brought into the city. If we look at something like the Junos have enormous cultural value and also tourism value, and that will bring maybe about 10 million into the Saskatoon area. So they're not, even though we're investing quite a bit, it is an investment, and we get quite a good return.
Now, so what will the NHL game, what do you think that will bring into town, and what about the curling tryouts?
It's the NHL Classic is such a unique event. It's the first time in Canada that's been held in a neutral site. So that's difficult to exactly pinpoint, but we think in the $15 million range for economic activity bringing into the province. And then similar numbers for the Roar of the Rings in 2021. So that's some of the benefits that the investments that Mary was talking about. And again, those are estimates, of course, and vary depending on certainly various things, but pretty decent return.
Now, in some of these events, part of the upfront costs, there's certain payments to the association, like to the NHL, you have to pay an upfront cost. There's just a bill you pay. And an amount. It's not you know, so much for different expenses or anything like that. It's a hosting bill. Hosting, I don't know what the word is, but I'm familiar that certain, you know, if you want to have the World Juniors, you pay X amount. If you want to have certain championships, you pay X amount. And is that this case with these events here? Are we paying so much up front for the Grey Cup? Or is this to help with the bid and to do with different expenses, but there's not a payment up front?
Yeah, Mr. Forbes, if I understand your question, these are asks into tourism as to what whoever's putting on the event would need to cover certain expenses to bring the event here to Saskatchewan, and so each is different, and tourism sort of does a analysis if that. The amount of people that would be coming here to Saskatchewan, how long the event is, if it's on national TV, international TV. Those are all factors that would come into the analysis tourism does to see if that investment is worth it, and then a decision's made from there.
And I understand that. I mean, you've used the example of Grey Cup generating $90 million. And so that's understandable. But there's been some organizations that have had that when they ask too much because they're not, the return is not viable and it's too much of a risk to the host. They say, you know, we get that it's a prestigious event, but you know, as with all organizations, sometimes we reach too far, and that's just part of doing business. And this is a business. And you say, you know, so that's what I'm getting at here. I'm very happy to see the Grey Cup coming in Junos and the outdoor game for sure, you know, the curling, you know, but I am curious about that, and maybe we'll see more of those details later on. We have about half an hour and 15 minutes left. I'm curious about our marketing costs when they compare to other provinces. How much are we spending internally and externally when we travel outside the province to promote our province, but also internally? As I said, these two people out in the front step could have used a little remedial work on how good this province is. So how do we promote ourselves internally? How do we compare to other provinces?
So, Mr. Forbes, a lot of our marketing strategy is within Saskatchewan and in Alberta. That's a big bulk of our tourism sector, is our own folks and our neighbors here in Canada, and we spend roughly just $1 million here in Canada. And then I talked earlier about getting those folks, including the gentleman you talked to, from Texas and elsewhere in the United States for that lucrative hunting and angling asset that we have here in Saskatchewan. We spend about $1 million down south in various forms, going to wildlife, and I'm sorry, I'm not a hunter, but hunting and angling shows and industry shows. We go to a couple of those, have actual people there, and of course the digital marketing part we do as well on the stateside to help lure those folks north of the border.
So what would be the Alberta equivalent to Tourism Sask? What would they be spending?
In that $50 million range, some 50, yeah. So so other provinces spend a fair bit more than Saskatchewan. I would say though, Saskatchewan, like in other areas, we punch well above our weight. We do a lot with the tourism, does a great job with the money that they do have in terms of the tourism education and the training programs they do as well, and so and certainly the marketing aspect, we're there. We try and do that as efficiently as possible, and understand these are precious taxpayer dollars, and so I think overall they do a great job of getting Saskatchewan's name out there.
What about Manitoba? What would they be spending in a year?
I'll just say we're not exactly sure what Manitoba, and it's not really an apples to apples comparison between the provinces. Some agencies do more, some do less, some do different things, but I think Mary can answer that a lot better than I could.
Mary Taylor Ash. Manitoba has increased their marketing budget recently. And we, as the minister pointed out, we really do punch well above our weight with visitor expenditures at $2.37 billion. Many of you know that I was in Newfoundland and with the Ministry of Tourism there, and at about $1 billion a year, again, not apples to apples, but $1 billion in visitor expenditures, they were spending about $12 million to get that, just in marketing alone. And so our budget, and this is why it's a little bit difficult in comparing across jurisdictions, because we are responsible for, with our 15 million plus, we are responsible for marketing, for product development, for education and training, and visitor services. So we have one of the broadest mandates across the country, so it's a little bit difficult sometimes separating that. The other point I would, and doing the comparison, the other point I would like to make is that because we are digital first, and we have moved largely away from printing materials, and because of the way that you can market today, it's less expensive to market than it used to be. And so therefore, our dollars can go further. And we've also done a tremendous amount of research as well, so that we're very much targeting who we need to target, as opposed to just, doing advertising that's very broad-based, so that we feel that we're able, with the money that we have, to have a much more focused approach and a better return. So, question about Manitoba. How are they doing compared? I mean, you just gave me a good answer about Newfoundland. How much are people spending in Manitoba, and how much is it costing?
Sorry, Jonathan Potts. So as Mary mentioned, their marketing budget is higher. The visitor expenditure, I believe, is a little less than ours. So I think they're sitting around 1.9 or $2 billion compared to our 2.37 billion in expenditures.
Okay, thank you for that. And I appreciate you talking about your research, but there's a couple of points I want to make first. What are the trends in ecotourism?
Jonathan Potts. Typically, we don't even really use the term ecotourism nowadays, just because it became a little overused and used incorrectly, I think, for the wrong purposes. But the trends typically are for authenticity and for sort of transformative experiences. So typically what a tourist of that nature would be looking for, you're on to something there. They're looking for a nature-based experience, but they also want to experience local culture. So it might be indigenous culture, it might be settler culture, like for homesteading culture, whatever it might be. But they're looking for a well-rounded educational experience where they also get physical activity. So it's not just pure nature travel anymore.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, I feel maybe I'm just getting old, and I do think about that. I'm a bit of a bird watcher. I'm going to England, so I've got my British bird watching book, and I'm studying up on what's out over there. But interesting. I appreciate that and the storytelling thing, which leads me to, and I appreciate the research that you're doing. So can you tell me how much of that research is being done by in-house, your own policy people, versus contracting out? And who are you contracting with that are some of the maybe big names in tourism?
Potts. So we have research agency of record based in Saskatoon in Citrix. So we test all of our creative with them and our campaigns with them. So that's how we measure a lot of our own success. Going to other well-known firms, we use Environics for a lot of the really detailed analysis of Canadian and US markets, because they have access to what's come to be known as big data, and can really profile visitors across the US, across Canada for us in a way that a local firm couldn't. We use a company out of Vancouver called Destination Think, which does social listening. So listening to every conversation that's been had about Saskatchewan and about tourism in Saskatchewan over the past 3 years, and identifying what the trends are, what the strengths are, what the weaknesses are in terms of essentially word of mouth, what's become the new form of word of mouth. So those would be three probably the biggest ones. I guess the other one is Destination Canada and Statistics Canada, which really is foundational, and most provinces and territories have some form of partnerships with them. We've found that we get very good bang for our buck working with them as well.
So, I mean, I appreciate this because, you know, I think of research, I think of somebody in a library pulling out books, but really you're in people, they're talking, finding out what people are talking, thinking about shopping trends, buying trends, that type of thing. But you're not using Google or any groups like that. One way that was a joke, but it's not a joke, you know, because it's such a serious business when we get into watching what kind of trends are happening online and that kind of stuff. So if you were to say, what are the new trends? What are you thinking in 5 or 10 years down the road? Are you anticipating some shifts that will get Saskatchewan and keep it in a leadership role?
Rash. We are just in the process now of completing a destination development strategy, and that's a 10-year strategy, and it's very much focused on where we can see the growth for Saskatchewan. And there are a number of areas that we will look specifically at, but one of the things that we are very interested in is growing our yield. So having the people who are traveling to the province spending more money. And typically, the closer that you are, you know, the visitor, if you're a domestic visitor and you live within the province, and we love people traveling around our province. So, you know, we want our people who are residents to stay here and enjoy our great tourism offerings. But they typically are the lowest spending group. And so the further afield you go, so when we look at our US visitors that primarily come here to hunt and fish, or we look at our overseas visitors, are often a higher yield, a higher spend, they stay longer. So one of the things that we are looking at is really trying to maximize, you know, spreading out, finding the pockets of people. Jonathan had mentioned earlier, the trend is very much experiential, and he used the words transformative. People are traveling for an experience. He also used the word authentic. People want to go places and learn about the culture and truly experience the place. We need to do a lot of work with that. In Jonathan's area in marketing, they've been doing a lot of work around how we message, how we get our message out. And so we've become very sophisticated with targeting our message and getting it out through the various digital channels. But we also know we have to deliver on the promise. So we need to work with the Cypress Hills. We need to work with Waskesiu. We need to work with Manitou, Carrot River. We need to work with our cities and our destinations to make sure that we are packaging the experiences, developing experiences, and having Saskatchewan as a place that needs to be on someone's list that they have to come visit. One of the good news pieces out of the recent federal budget, dare I say, good news, Destination Canada received money, and I think it was $5 million, that is going to be used to market lesser-known destinations in Canada and having us as Canadians move around our country. And so we hope, you know, talking about a plan going forward, we're really hoping to tap into that as well.
On the, just on, the committee might be interested in knowing, I heard a presentation on the authentic part of an experiential part. Apparently there's interest from a growing amount of tourists that want to experience winter. Not just, they might come from a country that's, that might seem very odd to us in Saskatchewan, but they are very interested in -25 and seeing what that's like. And you know, it's very beautiful here in the winter, but the temperature is often a hindrance. So apparently, more and more folks want to try skating on a lake, or sled dogging, or snowmobiling, that sort of thing. And so, hey, Saskatchewan's got plenty of that, and so that might be, as you mentioned, in the next 5 to 10 years, something that becomes more of a thing, and not just in that, you know, that sort of April to September high season that we have here in Canada. But if we could spread that out in the shoulder season a little bit more, that might be an opportunity. But I found that very interesting.
Well, I see my time's going really quick, so I'll talk really quick. But I do want to say I appreciate the comments about the equity, your representative workforce. Very important, and I think it represents our province well, especially Indigenous people, but also women and people with disabilities. All of that, it's a very important way to make show that we're fair and a full province when it comes to work. And because in tourism, whether you're self-employed, and I appreciate I forget what the term was when you train workers, particularly in the service industry. I think that's a wonderful program. So with that, Mr. Chair, I would just like to thank these folks. I think we just have half an hour, and we've reached our time. Is that, I'm correct on that? Yeah, thank you. So I'd like to thank the officials for coming and sharing their insights into this, and it's a great thing. Thank you.
Well, okay. Seeing no further questions, we'll adjourn our consideration of the estimates for Tourism Saskatchewan. Minister, are you going to be changing officials? Okay. So we'll take a recess now for the officials change. Thank you.
yourself there, Fred.
Well, welcome everybody back to Intergovernmental Affairs and Justice. We will now begin our consideration of Vote 27, Parks, Culture and Sport, Central Management and Services, Subvote PC01. Minister Makowski, please introduce your officials and make your opening comments. And I'd like to remind the officials that when you speak, could you please state your name for Hansard?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be here this evening to talk about the estimates for the Ministry of Parks, Culture, Sport. To my left is Twyla McDougall, Deputy Minister, and Candice Caswell, Assistant Deputy Minister of the Stewardship Division, Jennifer Johnson, ADM Parks Division, Leanne Thera is behind my left shoulder. Director, Strategic and Corporate Services, Darren Banadega is the Director of Sport, Culture and Recreation Branch. Byron Davis is the Director of Infrastructure and Capital Planning. Bruce McCannell is Executive Director of Park Management Services, and Lynn Halverson is Director of Financial Services. That is all of them here this evening. Our direction and budget for the 2019-2020 is focused on the right balance for our province I'm proud of our government's hard work over the last number of years. We're returning to a balanced budget with sound fiscal management while supporting economic growth and ensuring quality government programs and services for the people of our province. We have a lot of exciting programs and services underway at the Ministry of Parks, Culture and Sport. I'm pleased to share some of them with you this evening. From our provincial parks to the Royal Saskatchewan Museum, supporting the culture, heritage, sport and recreation sectors, we continue to contribute to our province's quality of life and economic growth by providing high-quality visitor experiences. Visitation and satisfaction remain strong in our beautiful provincial parks. Over the past 10 years, visitation has been increasing, and I'm pleased to say nearly 4 million visitor days were recorded in 2018. Our parks are the perfect place for family and friends to get together. We look forward to welcoming families back for another memorable season starting real soon here. Campers can once again enjoy provincial parks with convenience and ease. We recently announced an expansion of the innovative Camp Easy program. This season will be offered in 8 provincial parks. You may recall Camp Easy is a fully equipped camping experience that we piloted last year in 3 of our provincial parks. Guests save time and the expense of purchasing equipment, which allows more time to experience the beauty and nature of our parks. It's also an excellent opportunity for those new to camping or for those interested in a convenient camping trip that requires minimal preparation and effort. With the large amount of interest and success of the program, we are pleased to offer this experience to more people in new locations throughout the province. For an upgraded experience, guests can book the Mongolian Yurt at Anglin Lake at Great Blue Heron. We piloted the Mongolian Yurt last summer and it was very popular. As visitation continues to increase in our parks, we want to ensure high quality experiences. Changes to some fees starting this month will help offset rising operating costs. As a result of these fee changes, and the Ministry is forecasting an additional $1.4 million in revenue in 1920, which provides an opportunity to manage rising costs and reduce reliance on government funding. Although some fee changes have been implemented, a basic camping holiday still remains very affordable. Daily entry non-electric camping and group camper rates are not changing. In addition, for the first time, campers can enjoy a $5 decrease in their nightly fee if they camp before June 24th. It's important to note government is ensuring provincial park facilities and infrastructure systems meet the growing needs of our parks visitors. Since 08-09, a total of $110 million has been invested toward capital improvements in provincial parks. The 1920 budget includes a further investment of $9.5 million for capital projects and $1.6 million for capital maintenance. Planned capital improvements include replacement of the swimming pool at Buffalo Pound Provincial Park, which is scheduled to open in the summer of 2020, construction of a new visitor center at Canada Lake, and improvements to campground electrical services, park roads, drinking water, wastewater systems, campground service centers, boat launches, and many other facilities across the park system. These investments support the government's mandate to enhance quality of life and grow tourism in the province. Mr. Chair, visitation is also on the rise at the Royal Saskatchewan Museum. In 2018, visitation was in excess of 138,000, and I do need to point out that it's been closed for 36 days due to construction of the new world-class exhibit featuring Saskatchewan's own Scotty, due to open in May. There's certainly been many international headlines of Scotty being officially named the most massive T-Rex. I think it's safe to say there is a lot of buzz in our province, and hopefully more folks will be coming to the RSM to visit from Saskatchewan, but also outside our borders. The original home of Scotty, the T-Rex Discovery Center in East End, will be opening soon for the season. It opens on the May long weekend until September long. For the first time, visitation at East End exceeded over 10,000 in 2018. At the RSM, one-time capital funding of $35,000 for specimen preservation equipment is being provided this year. We're fortunate to have some world-renowned scientists, and they really do a very important work on behalf of the people of our province. The engaging exhibits and programs, popular science-based, family-friendly events are really a big draw for citizens and tourists. The RSM is also working on a strategy to improve core infrastructure. This work aligns well with the RSM's new elevator, a fully accessible washroom, and the installation of free Wi-Fi, all for improved visitor experience. We're continuing to fund and support our partners and stakeholders in promoting the value of arts, culture, and sport and recreation in our province. While the Community Initiatives Fund has been reduced in 1920, consistent funding levels will remain in place for various arts, culture, and heritage organizations. The Ministry will invest $6.6 million in the Arts Board to keep our arts community alive and strong. Since 1948, the Arts Board has played an important role in recognizing, encouraging, and supporting the arts to enrich community well-being, creativity, diversity, and artistic prosperity. The Ministry will also invest $7.3 million in Creative Saskatchewan. This investment will help grow the creative economy in our province, helping entrepreneurs and small businesses support product development, market development, and innovation. Investments in visual arts and craft, publishing, music and sound recording, live performance arts, screen-based media, and digital media make our province a great place to live. Additionally, we are proud to support the creative industries with $280,000 when Saskatoon hosts the Best of the Canadian Music Scene with the Juno Awards in March of 2020. Events like this bring people together to celebrate and showcase not only our great Canadian talent, but all our province has to offer. Please, we'll be keeping the same funding levels for a number of our heritage institutions such as Wanuskewin, the Science Centre, and the Western Development Museum. The parking lot at the WDM Saskatoon recently received a large makeover. For many years, this parking lot was in poor condition. The upgraded project has significantly improved accessibility, especially after heavy rain or snow melt. The Heritage Foundation has maintained the same funding level as 1819. The work of the Sask Heritage Foundation is supported by the Ministry's Heritage Conservation Branch, which continues to support heritage property owners, community organizations, and economic sectors such as oil and gas throughout the province, with expert advice on how to protect and conserve heritage properties. An important highlight since I've had the pleasure to be in government was renewing the lottery agreement in January, which guarantees eligible sport, culture, and recreation organizations will continue to receive the benefits from the lottery proceeds for the next 5 years. Pleased to sign this agreement on behalf of the government with our three funding partners, Sask Sports, Sask Culture, and the Parks and Recreation Association. I certainly know the impact of this agreement on those sectors. I've had the opportunity to coach for many years, and many kids have benefited from those dollars in our communities. On the sporting front, it's shaping up to be an exciting summer when the City of Swift Current hosts the Western Canada Summer Games. In 1920, the Ministry will make the second $750,000 payment for a total of $1.5 million towards the Games. It will feature 16 sports and will be the 5th time Saskatchewan has hosted the Games. And of course, we look forward to cheering on our athletes here at home. As part of the federal provincial territorial bilateral renewal agreement, we're continuing to support Indigenous community sport development, Indigenous coaches and officials, and the Dream Brokers program through shared investments. The federal share through Sport Canada provides $2.2 million, and the provincial share of $6.6 million is contributed through the Lottery Trust Fund. The purpose of the funding is to advance reconciliation with Indigenous peoples by responding to the TRC calls to action around sport and reconciliation, numbers 87 through 91. Program initiatives will increase sport opportunities for youth within the Aboriginal community. Aboriginal leadership will be strengthened in coaching and officiating, and community sport development will be enhanced through programming that includes new sport skills to children and youth. New to our budget this year is $100,000 in funding for the Royal Canadian Legion and Army, Navy, Air Force Veterans, ANAVETS Support Fund. This will provide much needed support to Saskatchewan's Legions and ANAVET branches. These local groups provide important gathering places for communities in our province, and their work is greatly appreciated. We're happy to be able to provide this support. The Ministry of PCS welcomed the Francophone Affairs branch in 1819. The branch will continue to be a liaison between the provincial government and the province's Francophone population and will implement the newly signed Canada-Saskatchewan Agreement on French Language Services. This investment will support the development and delivery of French language services in early learning and childcare, health, culture, tourism, post-secondary education, employment, and immigration, as well as other initiatives. The 1920 provincial budget sets the course on returning the balance for the people who call this province home, while investing in services, programs, and infrastructure that citizens care about. So with that overview, I'll turn over to the chair, and we will endeavor to answer any questions the committee might have.
Well, thank you, Minister. Mr. Forbes, do you guys have any questions?
Yes, thank you very much, and thanks for the introduction. It's a good review of the matters at hand, but I do have a few questions. right off the bat, just some general ones in terms of the FTEs. Do you see a reduction in terms of the FTEs?
Forbes, in general, we forecast a similar expenditure on the number of FTEs in the ministry. In 18-19, the actual utilization was 428.3, and again, we don't generally do forecasting for the number of FTEs. We don't budget for the number of FTEs, but the actual expenditure is budgeted.
So I understand that it will be a reduction of 2 FTEs. Is that true?
In our ministry, two, I think what you're referring to, 2 folks will be transferred, 1 to central services and 1 to SAS builds.
Thank you. And we also note that under central management and services, there's an increase of $12,000. Is that right?
We've in this budget for PCS, we've budgeted $12,000 for potential salary adjustments in the upcoming 1920 year.
So you've put that, you're anticipating a salary increase in that amount. Have you done the same with the in-scope people as well? Have you put aside an increase for them?
My officials say it's both for out-of-scope and in-scope. Yep.
No.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Hi, Twyla McDougall. The $12,000 is just one of the adjustments we've made to general salary increases. Throughout other areas within our budget, there's some other salary increases made to accommodate any salary changes in the coming year.
can you describe more fully the $12,000? Who will be getting that? Is that a 2% or 3 or 4% increase to out of scope? What is that?
So again, Twyla McDougall, it has not been assigned to any one individual yet. It's an estimate provided by the Ministry of Finance, and we won't be assigning anything until such time as collective bargaining has been finalized, and I just can't talk about that. So it is not assigned. There's no specific increase to anybody yet.
So I heard you say Finance put the marker in your budget estimates. That wasn't something you asked for?
Finance did all of that to anticipate collective bargaining, yes, so that we could cover it off.
Whatever, all right, yeah, fair enough. Okay, now, within your ministry, do you make much use of consultants outside your people?
So the ministry rarely, I would say, is a fair term to use, uses consultants in some highly technical fields, such as engineering for parks capital, for example, those types of things. I've done some consulting work on looking at municipal property taxes and comparables within provincial parks. So those type of things, but I would say there's not a large swath of consultants out there within the ministry. They're kind of one-offs, and as issues come up, we'd use those on a limited basis for a limited amount of time.
Thank you. Is the ministry being sued at or the target of any lawsuits at this time, active lawsuits?
So, Mr. Forbes, we can confirm that there are, but of course, with them being before the coast, we can't get into any specifics and any details, as I'm sure you can appreciate.
Now, can you give me a number of how many lawsuits without getting into details?
I guess, Mr. Forbes, there's, again, hesitate to talk about these, that things that may be before court, and of course, some are in different stages, and so it depends what your definition of an actual active lawsuit would be, and they're in, maybe in different stages. Is it fair to say they could be counted on one hand, less than one hand? I think that's an accurate statement for the umbrella, and some are across different ministries. So again, I don't think I want to delve too much into something before the court, just to anything in the legal sphere we want to not talk about. Certainly here, those take place in the appropriate settings, and I'm not sure if committee is to talk in detail about them.
Well, I mean, we can have that debate, but I'm definitely not going on a fishing trip. I'm just curious about a general idea. I feel like Trump's lawyer, is it less than 5? Is it more than 100? Is it 500? But I know it is the course of government that these things do come up, and that's fair. I want to get into the parks area, which is a very, very important part of the work that you do, and it's an important part of Saskatchewan. And so with the fees going up and being announced just prior to Christmas, we were all a little surprised at that, because these are really important places where people can afford to go to. And so, as you said, it's a $1.4 million revenue. Goes into the, I think it's called the Commercial Revolving Fund. And so that reduces the amount that the government has to pay to that fund. So it's a bit of a complicated process, but it's straightforward in many ways. I'm curious about how you arrived at some of the decisions to increase the fees. And one that in particular was, if I'm right, the elimination of the 3-day pass. It is now gone. It is a 7-day pass or the season pass. What kind of research, what kind of work did you do to arrive at making sure these are still affordable to people in Saskatchewan?
So, Mr. Forbes, I certainly agree with you how important the park system is to those, the tourism sector, as we just had those officials here earlier, but also the quality of life. And we want to certainly make sure we have a balance between making it affordable for those that do want to camp here in Saskatchewan, and also being able to reinvest in those parks to have high quality experiences for our visitors. And so you try and find that balance. I think certainly you look across jurisdictions, what are other jurisdictions charging, and that's an important. We want to be competitive with our neighboring provinces and states on that part of it. And certainly we also look at regional parks within Saskatchewan and the private sector as well, what they are charging for their rates, and we want to, of course, be in the range there. And so when we look at those things, I think we are. I'll note that it's still very affordable in Saskatchewan to go camping. We have not increased our economy sites or our non-electrical sites, and daily fee is similar to what it's been in the last few years. And so any family out there wanting to try camping, certainly I think it is an affordable excursion. Also note in my opening statements that for the first time we have decreased nightly camping prior in sort of the shoulder season for anyone that wants to have a cheaper stay prior to when school gets let out, when the increased traffic in parks is certainly noted. And so similar to what happens in hotels, I think when there's high demand seasons or there's large events happening in your city, you tend to see the costs go up in those high demand times, and in lower demand times the price goes down. So we've seen that within the provincial parks. We're trying that this year, and to hope people can try camping in our shoulder season. So we have to watch that. We also have to watch visitation numbers, and we've certainly not seen a massive decrease in that aspect as well. As I mentioned, there's been roughly 4 million visitors to our parks the last number of years, and we've had a few things beyond our control, certainly fires being one of them, and fire bans another one, which have not necessarily affected numbers by a great amount, but it's reasonable to think that those numbers might be even higher if you have one of those perfect seasons out there where everybody can have a campfire every time and there's no smoke or anybody having to stay away because of forest fires. And so we've certainly seen a lot of folks turn up at our provincial parks. And again, I would note that the General Revenue Fund does subsidize the cost of camping within the park system, so we have to be mindful of that as well. So, not including the capital costs as well as the maintenance costs are borne by the taxpayer as well. So, again, I think we found a right balance there in terms of all the capital investments we've done in our parks. On the electrical side, I think of camping has certainly changed the voltage required for some of the units out there now is fairly large, and I should say amps, I think is the correct term. But we've again, I talked about earlier in my comments, we want to keep reinvesting in our parks to have a good visitor experience, boat launches, safe potable water, and again supporting the trend to larger campers and those folks that want full service sites. So we want to invest in our parks that way. And so I think these fee increases are reasonable.
Mr. Minister, the last time we heard a minister talk about subsidies, it was around SCC, and we saw SCC being sold off. You're not at all suggesting that we should apologize for the funds that the parks receive from the GRF. Is there any sentiment in this government at all to see the parks privatized?
No, not at all. No, hardly being the case. Again, there are certainly large expenditures that we've made into our provincial parks, and certainly happy to do that. We know, as I mentioned before, the quality of life is important, and it's people's vacations, and they look forward to it every year. So we certainly do make that investment, as I mentioned before, on the capital side, but also on the operating side, and that's something governments right across the spectrum have done for many years. And I just mentioned it to point it out that we have to find a reasonable balance there, and I think we have with some of our minor increases to our nightly camping and our entry fees.
And as well, I would assume, and you've probably done this work, or tourism has done this work, the impact on the local community, like Maple Creek must do really well because of Cypress Hills, and you can go around the province and say, whether you're buying gas or groceries, local communities really appreciate that. Have you done an impact study, or do you know the numbers in that kind of perspective?
have numbers, but we do know from Tourism Saskatchewan that a lot of that 2.37 billion spend on tourism in our province comes from the camping sector. I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but again, I think there's no question that camping forms a large part, and people really love our wonderful provincial parks, all the benefits they have to their families and the great memories they realize when they get to spend time together again at our beautiful natural settings. It's certainly one of the jewels of our province, our provincial park system. And boy, it's very important. I certainly know you mentioned in the Cypress Hills area there are a lot of Alberta plates, and folks come across the line to camp in the Cypress Hills and even the Sass Landing area, and the impact, the tourism. We talked earlier about the East End T-Rex Discovery Center, and I know that that feeds from a lot of folks in the summertime being down at the Cypress Hills there. So absolutely, I don't have exact numbers, but there's no question the impact that camping has on our numbers on the tourism side.
This was a comment I think was made a few years at SUMA, though, around the reserve sites, was the fact that with the processes of reserving sites, do you have a sense of, you know, your camps, the campgrounds are all filled technically, but actually there are many sites still open? Do you monitor that at all?
Jennifer Johnson. So we last year actually intentionally did a marketing push. So there's that impression out there that campgrounds and campsites are full all the time and they're fully reserved. But in fact, oftentimes people will over-reserve at the start when the launch happens, and then they'll decide which vacation they want to take and maybe cancel some of their reservations. So last year we tried to address that directly, and we did some Facebook marketing to say, oh, have you checked out this park on the upcoming weekend? There's actually lots of sites available. And then we monitored if people booked, and we tracked that, and we did actually see increases to reservations through that marketing. What you're referring to is, we refer to it as ghost campers, so where somebody maybe reserves and then doesn't show up or isn't spending time in their site. Park managers do monitor that, but I'm not sure that that's a big issue with the reservable, online reservable now. We see more real-time reservations happening as opposed to historically where people maybe would book for a longer chunk of time and then show up, you know, just partway through that reservation just to ensure that they got the site for the weekend or something. Now people, you know, with the online system can reserve in real time, and they usually go there for those days.
So when you say real time, I'm planning to leave tonight to go to Cypress Hills. I can book before I leave home, which I couldn't do before. But the old, you know, or I shouldn't say old system, but the system from 10 years ago, where you would be booking up and people would be booking a lot, and then it would look like it's full, or the impression was that it would be hard to get a place. Now, so do you have real data on that? Do you have real numbers? You don't have to share it with me right now, but I hope that you're tracking this and getting a sense of what the trends are.
Forbes, we do track each entry and camping permit for each park. We don't know on a given amount of time the vacant sites. We certainly do monitor it. As mentioned, the park managers monitor if a site is booked and nobody appears to be there. That'd be something we look at, but we just have the specific numbers for the entry and camping permit for each park, and we can go into those numbers if you have any interest in that.
But getting back to, are schools aware that there's a $5 reduction in camping fees or the non-electrified before June 24th? Have you made an outreach to them to say, hey, you may have heard fees are going up, but that's for you folks? There's a deal out there?
The $5 discount is for nightly camping for your family, etc. Prior to June 24th, group camping is free within the parks. And so for school groups, I should say, sorry, not group camping, school group camping. Sorry for that. And each park, I think, has a pretty good relationship with the surrounding school district, and hopefully, I know prior to school being let out, there's lots of kids that go on day trips or spend a night or two at one of our parks for an outdoor visit to go canoeing, learn outdoor skills, make a fire, those sort of things, and that's very popular in high schools throughout the province. And so I would think that they would know that from the previous year and the many number of school groups. They would know from previous years, let's go down to the local provincial park and enjoy that. But again, that is new this year, that the schools will get into the parks free prior to school being let out.
Is it new this year? Okay.
Yep.
Now, I used to take my kids camping. I thought there was a cost, but that was 15 years ago. Yeah, but as a teacher,
okay.
Right. But the other issue, though, I have, and this is perhaps, well, I have an issue with all the increases, but the one particular is the elimination of the 3-day pass. Why did you eliminate the 3-day pass?
Mr. Forbes, the move from a 3-day to either to eliminate that to go to a nightly or a week-long or an annual pass, the savings were fairly minimal. I think it was $24 for a 3-day pass instead of what now I guess would be, if you want to stay nightly, $30, or if you want to stay a whole week, I believe it's $75. Annual pass is 70. Excuse me, I'm mistaken. So an annual pass, not a very large savings. Number one. Number two, simplify the fee structure. It's easy to do less of a number of options, and hopefully we get more folks to have an annual pass, and it's very affordable, and you get to come to our parks year-round, have not only during the summer, but during the winter months. And so that's some of the reasons we eliminated the three-day pass.
So the nightly, or it's a 24-hour pass, I assume. Is that right? Or do you have to be out by a certain time in the morning?
It's Jennifer Johnson. So if you're camping, we have check-in and check-out times, much like hotels, so that you can have the turnover. But if you're just going for the day, it's considered a daily entry pass. So depending on if you're camping and how many nights you would need versus if you're just going in for the day and leaving, you're covered. So
essentially, if you're coming in for the day to go swimming at noon, and it's $10 a day, so you write June 21st on it, or July 4th, or whatever. Then, if the sticker on your car the next day is, and it's the 22nd, you're expected to be out or buying a new pass by 11 in the morning or something. Is that right? You can't stay for the afternoon to swim.
technically, it's a one-day pass. So I guess 24 hours would be the technical, but we don't tend to monitor quite that closely.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think the 3-day pass was, and so, you know, you're saying $30 versus $24, $6. Yeah, I know, but it's still, I think that people think of a weekend pass. You know, you come in Friday, you leave Sunday type of thing, you know. So the other thing that I heard the question at SUMA, and curious about where things are going around cottage fee increases. Well, how is that going, and what is happening with cottage fee increases, and where are you doing that across all the provincial parks, or only in a certain few, or what's happening with that?
Forbes, the last round of reassessments occurred last year, and I'm sure you know, every 4 years there's an assessment done based on the land, and generally land values have increased in Saskatchewan, and provincial parks are no different there. So we increased the lease fees 12% over 4 years. Majority of that occurred in the first year. We did see some additional revenue this year because there is a maximum fee increase that cottagers will have to bear. And so again, we had most of that last year. We expect to over 4 years annual increase in revenue, $212,835. So again, they occur in every 4-year cycles, and that was the increase that we determined. So again, that'll be looked at again in the next cycle, or leading up to the next cycle, I should say.
Well, I am familiar with this issue a bit, having been, so I know it's a tough go. So have you been successful the last, so you've been 2014, 2010 when you did this as well, their ministry did this? So this is your third go with increases in cottage fees?
And just to clarify, Mr. Forbes, there's been cabins in provincial parks for decades, and many of them preceded they were there before they became a provincial park, in fact. And so this sort of assessment or fees has been going on for many years across many different governments.
I beg to differ on that. It's been a difficult thing.
Misunderstanding what you're saying.
Well, you're giving me the impression that you did it. You looked at the last assessments a year ago, and fees went up, and cottage fees went up, and people accepted that, and that was good. And so I'm saying, did that happen the previous 4 years and the previous 4 years? Because my own experience when I was minister was this was a difficult thing, and it hadn't been done for many years. Partly because assessments was a relatively new tool, and people were debating whether it was a property tax or a fee, and can you do that? And so I'm curious to know if you've done this several times. Good on you for that. You're pretty successful. But if it hasn't been, because just from the tone of that question, there was a bit of pushback. People were saying, you know, at SUMA, saying this is not on. We don't pay property taxes. The question was actually, I think, from somebody outside the park who was concerned that the people inside the park weren't paying property taxes. And of course, the legal definition, they don't own the land, they're leasing, but fees can go up. And there's reasonable amounts when it's based on an assessment, which is, it sounds like your plan. So my question is, how many times have you done this? How many times has the ministry done this in the last 10 years or 12 years?
Mr. Forbes, I'm sorry, I might have misunderstood your question in terms of the last several decades of provincial parks, but in the timeline you noted, every 4 years there's an assessment, and we consult with the Cabin Owners Association. We have a relationship there that we talk, and so they understand the process. I guess it depends on who you talk to, whether the fees have gone up high, and I guess any taxpayer within the province of Saskatchewan might have many different opinions on the amount of tax they pay or the amount of fees they pay, etc. And so again, we have dialogue with those folks and come to a reasonable number. Again, they're not always happy, but again, hopefully a reasonable number is achieved. And I think you mentioned earlier, and it is true, it's it's an interesting situation sometimes where there's a good argument that cabin owners don't have title to their land. It's leased from the province, and that has implications as to how you come to a taxation number. But we'll work our way through it, and here we are. And I'm sure that that will continue, and we'll continue to look at what's reasonable from taking everybody's perspective.
So overall, how many campsites are there in the provincial park system? What's the total number, and how many are electrified?
7,000 sites at our provincial parks.
How many are electrified?
Roughly 85% are electrified, I'm told.
That would be about 6,000? Yeah. Okay. So I was noting in public accounts that in 2016, the SAS power charges in the parks is $1.3 million. And so I don't know what it would have been last year. I assume maybe more. And I don't know where that's reasonable on how do you, what would that make up? Would that be, of course, you have your park office, you have lighting, you have all of that kind of stuff, the infrastructure. But how much of that would be going to the consumption in the sites?
No. This is the first time.
So we don't break it down per site. We don't have the sites metered for power consumption. But lots of the infrastructure in our provincial parks require power, like not just the buildings, but the sewer, the water, et cetera. But we don't break it down per site.
Now, is that something you've ever considered in terms of climate change or global warming, that you may want to have a better handle on what that consumption? If it's $1.3 million, and now I'm thinking that the total park budget, would it be 15, 18 million, somewhere in that range? The contribution from the commercial revolving fund is about 9 million. And so it's a significant, it's 5%, 7% of the cost to run your park.
The total park expenditure annually is about 28.5 million. And you know, I think we've done some things on the energy efficiency side. We want to certainly contribute that way to reduce emissions and that sort of thing. So things many have heard before. You know, you try and use LED lighting, motion sensor lighting, water heating. I don't know the extent that we've used solar or wind on provincial parks, that might be something to look at. But of course, just like any household out there in Saskatchewan, we try and use less power when we can, but at the same time, we want to have good camping experience.
So how are the new parks coming along? You've designated 2 new parks, I believe. And how are they coming along?
All right, Mr. Forbes, there's been 2 provincial parks designated in our time in government. In 2010, Great Blue Heron Provincial Park was formed in northern Saskatchewan. It combined Emma and Anglin Lake, which were 2 former rec sites. My officials say it's a very popular park, a very beautiful park. I haven't had the chance to be up there as of yet. I mentioned in my opening statement the yurt that was put in place there, which served to be quite popular with folks that showed up there, and a beautiful setting. I'm told, just like many of our or all of our provincial parks, of course, though each one is different depending on where in Saskatchewan it's located. And just last year, you'll remember, and Porcupine Hill Provincial Park was designated, again, a combination of several rec sites in northeast Saskatchewan there. I had the chance to visit there this past summer, and it's a very, very beautiful area. We're sort of just getting started in that new provincial park. I think if you went there, if you go there this summer, it would be, I don't think you'd notice many changes from last year or the past 10 years. We're putting together a park advisory group. We hope local stakeholders will be interested in joining that, just like as this happened in at Blue Heron. And my understanding is that Blue Heron, it's gone very well with the park advisory group, and we hope to have great success at Porcupine as well.
And are you in the process, or are there thoughts around we talked about new trends in tourism, matching that up with the parks? Are you in the development of a new master plan, or thinking ahead to the next 5-10 years, what people will be doing? What's happening with that?
Well, I think it's fair to say, Mr. Forbes, we're always looking at new trends, and of course, depending on what type of park we have, I think every park's a little different. I think we just mentioned Porcupine Hills, more of a wildlife park and sort of a natural state and the natural beauty, and other parks like Cypress Hills as a swimming pool, and it has zip lines through a commercial SE. They have horses there, they have mini golf, and they have rock climbing, I believe. And so those are some of the things. We're always looking at trends. We work with Tourism Saskatchewan as well to see what we want to attract as many visitors as we can to our parks. And we're always looking at trends. It's been announced that at Rowan's Ravine there will be a inflatable water a park, kind of like I guess I don't know the right term, but a sort of a jungle gym. That's the wording I know of. Inflatable, and you can slide and you can jump off and you can do all sorts of things. And so those are things we'll continue to look at. Those experiences. For folks to have an enjoyable time with their families within the provincial parks. And so those are some of the things we're looking at and implementing. And again, I think the folks at parks do a good job in staying on top of some of those trendy things that may be coming, but also keeping to the basics as well, and having a campfire at night and roasting some marshmallows and maybe going fishing or what have you. But again, I think we want to have those high quality experiences that folks want to keep coming back year after year. And so we will look at proposals from the private sector, just like we have for many, many years within the parks, our commercial SCs, our partners in the parks, to things they might want to bring, keeping in mind the category, if I could use that word, the category of park it is, if it's a recreation site or a nature themed provincial park out there, historic site, that type of thing. So want to be true to those aspects of our parks, but also have people coming to our great parks.
Thank you. I'm going to shift gears a bit and talk about some of the culture, heritage, and sport rec type of stuff now. Just to note that under the community engagement, you have several organizations. In fact, when I look through them, the Heritage Institute, SAS Science Center, the Arts Board, Creative Saskatchewan, and the Heritage Foundation have all remained flat for this year from last year. How many years has it been since they last saw an increase?
So for all the institutions you have mentioned, the last time they were increased in a given year was 17-18 by a relatively small amount, but nonetheless, the actuals showed an increase.
Increase, okay. It is, every time there's not an increase, at least cost of living, essentially that's a cut. And they would argue that many of them are seeing that as a reality, that in fact the funding is not as strong as it could be, And, you know, and we've had this debate. I talked about it last year, and I think the Heritage Language, or the Heritage Act was up for some amendments, and the foundation particularly is the poor sister of all of them in terms of the funding, but all of them, the Arts Board, Creative Saskatchewan, which you've highlighted in terms of the good work they do, all are flat, and this is a tough thing. So, is there any plans to, you know, in the future to see their funding increase, or is this something that is not in the near future?
Well, yeah, I think, Mr. Forbes, I appreciate your comments. Certainly, we know these areas do good work, and we thank them for that. But I think as a government, you have to look at all areas and all areas of expenditures, and when you look at all of government, and you try to come up with this year a balanced budget, and certainly proud to say that we've achieved that through some hard work over the last few years when we saw a large decrease in non-renewable resource revenue, and we had to make that up somehow. But at the same time, I think we recognize the importance of the arts and culture sector in our province. But there was some tough decisions to be made right across government. Of course, on a year-by-year basis, so we will look at all our expenditures in every area of government, including this one, and realizing the value that it does have to our province. And I would suggest every line item in the budget, and all our stakeholders would like to see increases annually every year, but yeah, sometimes you have to make tough choices in government. That being said, on an annual basis, we will look at what we think is reasonable and responsible in this area and many other areas, and come up with a budget we think works for the people of the province of Saskatchewan. So again, I can't make a commitment today. We're discussing this year's budget, but no commitments into the future in terms of how much we'll be funding in this area, but any other area of government.
Looking at your plan for 2019-20, page 6 talks about the performance indicators, and one of them will be total employment from the production of art and culture products in Saskatchewan. You want to see an increase in total employment from that, in that area. So how are you going to do that when you're freezing money and you have frozen it for 2 years, so that you're probably seeing a cut? You know, it would be reasonable to say of 5% when you talk about cost of living over the 2 years. How are you going to get that more people working in an area that you're cutting by 5%?
Well, I think, Mr. Forbes, every area in government, we like to see increased employment, increased number of jobs. I don't think it necessarily has to be the completely government expenditure to increase our employment in any number of sector. I think we've seen in the last several months a great increase in the number of folks working in our province and being employed, and that's important, and I think a lot of those are in the private sector, and so I don't think you have to assume that government funding stays stable, that you can't have an increase of GDP or employment in any given sector, including the arts and culture sector. So I'll say that as well. I think in the I mentioned before, although we have stable funding in the arts and culture sector, we predict some growth on the lottery side. The lottery agreement we just signed for the next 5 years for the lottery funds, and that certainly goes a long way to increase the number of folks employed and interested and pursuing maybe a career in different sectors. And we have a growing population in our province, and that naturally leads to, I think, more opportunities and a bigger market for whatever you may be selling, not only in the cultural spaces or the artistic areas, but right across government. And I think Creative and the Arts Board do a great job to leverage those funds that we have spent in those areas, and you know, we hope that those investments will continue to increase the production of great art and great cultural experiences in our province. So we hope to see an increase, and again, I don't think it always has to come from government spending.
Well, that's fair enough, but it is your document. It's your planning document. It's not a private company's document. It's clear, and there's not that many indicators. So clearly this is the work you're in. And so, and maybe that's the case. But we have seen a government, I think of the PST on construction labor, having an impact on construction. And we have that debate, but you cannot deny today we saw building permits, the numbers are going down. And here we saw, you call it stable funding over 2 years, but anybody else would say, hey, if I'm getting paid the same and the cost of living is going up, my power bill's going up, my utility bills are going up, rent's going up, and I'm paid the same, it's really a cut. It's not stable. They're not staying in sync. So, no, fair enough, you might say, well, it's up to the private sector to step up, and all artists are more or less private sector. Very few actually work for the government of Saskatchewan. And so, but they do recognize, and we do recognize, that there's an investment, and correct, the Arts Board does a phenomenal job. The heritage people do a phenomenal job. Creative Saskatchewan do a phenomenal job, and we all wish we had more money. It's not, but the question remains, how are you going to then work with the private sector, saying just what you said, not always us, that has to put more money in. Are you going to the private sector and saying, listen, folks, here you have to step up and backstop?
So, Mr. Forbes, I don't think we, go out and say, private sector, you have to do something, or Certainly, our investments in the Arts Board and Creative and such is seed money, and one program we have within the ministry is the Arts Fest Saskatchewan. So it increases private sector sponsorship of arts and cultural organizations through matching grants as a result of the program. So the program began in 2011-12. The government has invested roughly $1.5 million in Arts Fest Saskatchewan, and Saskatchewan's arts and cultural organizations have used that to leverage $6.3 million in private sector sponsorship. So we hope to, within this budget, renew that. And so again, all those areas are sort of seed money, and as you mentioned, the artists in our province, they're all for the very most part, they may get some grant funding from those two agencies and from Arts Fest, and hopefully it leverages a career or sales, and certainly that's something we've always looked towards, and again, it's a combination of the two. Some government help in some of those areas through grants, but it's not something where we specifically say, okay, private sector, we just let it unfold as it may be, and I think it's worked well. Specifically, Creative Saskatchewan, a new agency, and I think it's leveraged a lot of economic impact in our province. It's certainly not what this area is always all about in terms of numbers and GDP and that sort of thing. It's thriving arts sector is important. I think we have that in our province. It's that cultural part is a very important part of our province. It has been. Witness the Arts Board's been around for 70+ years, and it's the first one in North America, I believe. And so, again, great tradition of that, and that will continue in our province.
Another story that won't go away, it hasn't been 70 years, it's been 7 years, but even today, we heard on CBC about the film tax credit. And I know that the government would hope this would go away, but the numbers are shocking in terms of we're at one time punching way above our weight. You know, in 2007, we were generating $42.2 million. Manitoba at the same time was $39.7 million. Now we are making about $21 million. And at the same time, Manitoba is bringing in $100 million. And you go to Alberta and BC, and I think I've told you about the stories that we understand in BC, they're converting old grocery stores into sound stages because they just don't have a sound stage. And yet we have one sitting over here, state of the art, empty, and for some reason, this government has decided that they will not invest in the film industry the way that the film industry really thinks they should. They do some through through Creative Saskatchewan, I understand that, but it is not at all a situation we see where we have a situation with Netflix spending $500 million in Canada, and even if we were to get our 3 or 4% of that, that would be significant. But we would usually have got much more than that because we have a soundstage. And I think earlier, Mr. Minister, when you talked about, or your officials from Tourism Saskatchewan talked about how people love the storytelling aspect of tourism or our place. And I think that is huge. Will this government ever come to reconsider how they're missing out on the film tax credit? You know, we have quotes from Mr. Wall saying, you know, that it was a grant system and they don't like grants, but we see how that happens with other areas that people are favorable to. And we talked about that earlier with the Grey Cup or the NHL game. People can get behind things like that, but we've lost an industry in creative people. People have just moved away to Ontario or BC. There's a few left here. The poor guy on the radio today trying to finish his film really believes in this province, believes that there's potential here, and believes in the sound stage. And, but it's getting harder and harder because people are just going away in that creative industry. So is the government ever going to reconsider this, or is this locked in stone? Is this an ideological decision, not a business decision?
Yeah, I appreciate the comments, Mr. Forbes. So, as you mentioned, 7 years ago, a difficult decision was made to move away from the grant system that covered a large portion of the labor of those productions being done in Saskatchewan. It was quite an expensive program at the time. Understand the film industry does generate economic activity, but the level of public investment was seen to be too great to justify it as ongoing. We saw the bidding war that it seemed you have to compete to get production here, and we just felt that there was there's certain public expenditures have the most impact to the citizens of our province. So again, we made the difficult decision to get out of that bidding war, but we did replace it. So with Creative Saskatchewan, as you acknowledged, where we do spend money on the film area, roughly just under $3 million a year. I think talking to folks in the industry, they appreciate the granting system, the folks that I have talked to, but they get the money up front, and that helps with financing, and it's 30% of the labor, I believe, at this point. But there is a cap, understanding I know the industry would rather not see that cap. $600,000 per production is the current environment here in the province. So again, it's a situation where you have to make tough decisions sometime, and the expenditure was considered fairly high. And although we see value in the creative industries, and that we've demonstrated that again, $7.3 million to not only film but to all the industries, and we had a great reception, I believe you were there, of all the creative industries that benefit the sound recording industry, the digital interactive industry, even theater professionals and galleries and the publishing area. Yes, thank you. So all those creative industries, rather than just focus just on film through the FETC, and that program, we decided to, in 2012, to have all the creative industries funded and to increase our GDP that way.
I find it just passing strange when a government, and you had alluded to this comment, how our dependence on non-renewable resources is very tough because of the boom and bust cycle that market that goes through. But here you have an industry that the film industry that you could invest in, and you would see incredible returns on your dollars. This is not just a one-for-one return, but I think it's $1 to $5 or $1 to $6, and it's not just the actors. There's the crews, and we just saw Barking Dog closed down. Finally, they were they gave the last gasp, and they tried to stay here. In fact, they were even trying to work with the government, understanding the challenges, but they couldn't make it. They just couldn't make it. And here you have, I think they were the only registered Dolby sound in Western Canada, if not Canada. Folks had come up from New York to see the good work that they had done. And to see that loss is huge. And I think of, you know, the story that a musician who tells me, quite famous, I'll just say from the Northern Pikes, if you know the Northern Pikes, how much money he would make from movie soundtracks, but can't do it anymore because everybody else is giving tax credits for people who live in the province where the movie is being produced. So if it's produced in Manitoba, they want a musician from Manitoba. If that's where the tax credit you'll get for the employment. This fellow happens to live in Saskatoon. He would get qualified for any movie made here, but he's out of luck. So does he move? Then you know the Northern Pikes were, for those who remember the 80s and the 90s, a few over there maybe. But it's just sad when you hear these stories and how they are willing to really go to the wall. These are not phenomenally rich people that are making billions of dollars or even millions of dollars. They're making a livelihood. And so when a government decides that they'd rather diversify their income by expanding the PST than expanding the film industry, especially when they have resources right here in this city with the soundstage. It's not like you have to rebuild the soundstage, but you may have to if you leave it in neglect for, I don't know, a while. But I want to talk about another area that, because our time is moving on, and I want to talk about a specific thing in sports and recreation, and that is around the whole issue. This came up in February this year, and that was a news story that broke nationally. About 200 coaches were convicted of sexual offenses in the past 20 years. And so Kirsty Duncan, the Canada's Minister of Science, and I would think also in sports, met with provincial meetings on February 15th and came together to develop the, I think it was the Pan-Canadian Declaration that will drive systematic cultural shift to prevent abuse, discrimination, harassment in sports. And this was done in Red Deer, Alberta. Were you at that meeting in Red Deer?
The FPT, and it was productive meetings, but a great event as always, as the winter games, summer and winter games always are, and got to meet a few of our athletes at the opening ceremonies. And
did you sign on to this declaration?
This is,
all did. So you did. We have not heard any media about that to that effect. Was there a reason for that?
Yeah, Mr. Forbes, certainly a very important issue. There was a press conference at the end of our FPT meetings announcing this, and there was, I believe, national reporting on it, and a press release that went out from the feds on that. So we'll continue, each province, our sport branch, and along with Sport Canada, we'll continue to work on any type of abuse and harassment within sport. I will note that we have developed and required each each sport governing body within the province to have their coaches go through a Respect in Sport program, an online tool for coaches and managers and officials to raise awareness of harassment and abuse is not to be tolerated whatsoever, and it guides us through that. And of course, every sport governing body looks at that very closely, and I think it's fair to say the sporting sector in our province takes those matters very seriously.
I have the CBC story from February 15th, but what I meant is I didn't hear anything about Saskatchewan. And so I'm wondering why Saskatchewan didn't issue their own press release saying that you signed on, that you were very active in this area, and these are the steps that are going to go forward. In fact, I'm wondering, why is it not part of your plan?
So again, Mr. Forbes, as we work with the federal government and our provincial partners in the declaration that was done, again, a public, I'm not sure if any other province, we're not quite sure, but we don't think that any other province made a sort of their own declaration. It was sort of done together at the end of the FPT meetings that we would continue to collaborate and work together and find best practices. One of those best practices is Manitoba and ourselves were leaders way back in 2013 on the Respect in Sport module, as I mentioned. And we will certainly, there may be announcements in the future as to steps taken through our province, but also, again, our partners right across the province, and rightfully so in a very serious area for our athletes in our province. So I would expect more as the work continues, but started off with a declaration from those meetings in Red Deer, and work will continue.
So how many, do you have any statistics since that Respect module, or let's go back for the last, till 2010. Do you know how many kids were abused by coaches in Saskatchewan in each of the last 10 years?
We, as a ministry, we don't track that. We do have the number of coaches that have gone through the Respect and Sport module and that sort of thing. But I see some of colleagues on the committee have, including myself, have gone through that program, as well as the coaching certification process through Sport Canada. So, but we do not have those numbers here.
One hand, I'm happy about that because I've been a coach too, but I'm also a parent, and I get really mad about this stuff. So as parents, you have to know what's going on in these arenas, in these places. It's mind-blowing that you don't know, and this didn't fire you up, that you came back in February and said to your staff, this is going to be in our year plan. Saskatchewan's going to be a leader, and it's all going to be about the kids. It's not going to be about the coaches. I could care less about the coaches, because if there's a kid that's being messed up, that's one too many. So, I want to know, can we get a copy of that protocol? And who do we contact? If a parent phoned me tomorrow and said, who do I phone about my kid? Who do you phone? And don't say SaskSport. I don't know how many people work in SaskSport. There's got to be a phone number that you should be able to call to disclose that your kid is being abused in a sport. And is there that number?
Well, Mr. Forbes, I appreciate your concern in this area. It's certainly a important one. We never want to see any bad experiences whatsoever in any of our communities, and certainly our sporting communities. Now, if there's something, any sort of abuse happening, I would call the police, number one. I would bring the justice system into it. But I know as a result of some of the FPT meetings, I think you specifically asked who to call. The police first, of course, but there's a Canadian Sport helpline that provides a safe place for victims or witnesses of incidents of harassment and discrimination in sport to report their concerns. It's a toll-free helpline, and certainly does not supplant any existing provincial services, but will direct callers in need of assistance and guidance to the most appropriate local and national services that are available to them, and based on the situation and the nature of the allegation and urgency. And I know the Red Cross here in Saskatchewan has a helpline for kids, I don't think necessarily just in sport, but anyone who experience harassment or abuse or bullying, that sort of thing. That is where I might call, but if, obviously in immediate action, or you have allegations, need to report something, the police is, I would think, for those cases where it's serious and needs immediate attention.
I thank you for that. I mean, we just have to think about Theon Fleury and the situations of current and all of these. And forgive me if I get a little emotional on this, because this is a huge issue. Sport is so important to our kids, and it can be so positive, but we don't want to turn it to the worst experience ever. And so whatever we can do, so I would urge you to make this a priority, put an addendum to your plan to say, this has got to be done, and it's got to have, I appreciate the coach focus, but it's really got to have a kid focus. What about the kid, and what can they do? What can they, how does a parent reach out? And they know the numbers to call. And I appreciate the answer you gave, because probably the police are the best ones to deal if it's a criminal activity, then that's right. But we don't want to hear of any circumstances at all. And I would really urge you to challenge Sassport to, what's the Saskatchewan experience? And we don't want to hear about it on CBC, and through some reporter who's got some information. We want this as an issue for all of us, so it can be a positive thing for us. So we need to turn this around, and so I appreciate that. So I've just got a few more minutes, and I just want to ask a few questions around, particularly around New Canadians, and how do we I don't know if you've seen this in Regina, but we've seen this in Saskatoon, where we see people playing cricket now in the lots and stuff, and people are asking me, so are there any supports for that kind of thing? Pitches, building, or I actually don't know what people need, but reaching out and supporting our old programs. The community rinks are so important, senior centers, that type of thing, but also the cricket pitches. Have you put much thought to that?
I know every time I go to coach or witness football at Liable Field, as you go on Douglas Park, there is always somebody playing cricket, and I certainly don't understand the game very well. My colleague, Mr. Buckingham, I believe, just informed me he was at an indoor cricket tournament not too long ago in Saskatoon, and certainly a growing sport in our province. And I was invited to a event where they brought a couple of cricketers from India who were very popular, and they were very revered by the local cricket community, and I was able to listen to their exploits on their pitch. And so certainly it's an emerging sport in our province, and it's great to see different games being played in Saskatchewan by different communities in our province. And so specifically to cricket or any other sport, through the lottery community grant program, all municipalities have access to funding through that program. It is very well used out there, and so if municipalities have an interest in creating a cricket pitch in different communities in our province, I know there's in our major centers there certainly are, but that is out there for funding. And again, I think cricket will, my understanding, it's one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing sport in our province. And so that's great to see folks getting out and being active and having fun in that sport. And I'm sure we'll see it not necessarily being emerging, but I believe they're working towards eligibility on the minister's list through SaskSport, and that I'm sure SaskSport will continue to work with their associations in our province as that sport continues to grow.
Thank you for that, and so there are some leads there that they can use. Well, what about the old-fashioned community rinks? Are you still supporting those? Are there grants available for the power bills? There was at one time, I'm not sure if they're still in existence.
I think the program you're referring to, Mr. Forbes, was the Community Rink Affordability Grant, and it, I believe it paid $2,500 each ice surface to again help defray those costs, which can be quite large. Running those ice power plants in different communities across the province. Unfortunately, as referenced before, the decrease in the resource revenue and some tough decisions that we had to make across all ministries, but including PCS. This was funded through PCS, and that was suspended a couple of years ago. We're still trying to find the exact year, but a couple of years ago when we had to make some of those tough decisions, that was part of that process.
Thank you. And just one last question. The former critic asked me to raise again. Last year, I think he raised, and several years he's raised the issue around Churchill River and the potential is some sort of heritage or some sort of park status along that area. It's a beautiful part of, really a beautiful part of the province. In the Stoic Falls, have you been to the Stoic Falls? Then you've got to go. You have to go. And there has to be some, he's thinking about some designation. Any word along the Churchill River?
Mr. Forbes, I appreciate your comments, and I would also suggest there's many, many more beautiful sites within the province. I don't think there's any specific plans immediately to do any designation. Of course, Lac La Ronge Provincial Park is a massive area, and some of that flows is protected, the Churchill River area. Of course, not all of it. Of course, you mentioned the Stoiac Falls. I believe they're just outside the provincial park, but I don't believe there's any immediate plans to increase the footprint of that very large provincial park at this time. Keeping in mind, I know it's a beautiful area, I'm told, from Mr. McCall, and I know it's a favorite of his, and we'll keep that in mind, but no immediate plans, but I will try and get out there at some point to witness for myself.
All right, Mr. Chair, I want to thank the Minister for the time for the questions and the officials for their answers. I really appreciate that. It's been a very good evening. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Minister, do you have any closing comments?
I think all the members of the committee, specifically Forbes, appreciate those, and thank you for our great public officials that do a great job on behalf of parks, arts and culture, and all the areas that are important to the people of the province of Saskatchewan that are encompassed in this ministry. We thank them for being here this evening.
Okay, I will ask a member to move a motion of adjournment. Mr. Francis so moves. Is that agreed? Carried. This committee stands adjourned till Wednesday, April the 10th, 2019 at 6 p.m.